Hello and welcome to Podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. When you're ready to launch your next app or want to try a project you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out Linode. With 200 gigabit private networking, scalable shared block storage, node balancers, and a 40 gigabit public network, all controlled by a brand new API, you've got everything you need to scale. Go to podcastinit.com/Linode today to get a $20 credit and launch a new server in under a minute. And visit the site at podcastinit.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the newsletter, read the show notes, and get in touch. And go to podcastinit.com/chat to join the community and keep the conversation going. Your host as usual is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Dan Bader about finding, filtering, and creating resources for Python developers at Real Python, PyCoders, and his own training services. So Dan, could you start by introducing yourself?
Hey, sure. So my name is Dan Bader. I'm a programming book writer, and I'm also the editor-in-chief at a site called Real Python, as well as the PyCoders weekly newsletter.
And do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Yeah, I do. So that was on a ski trip. So I got a degree in computer science, and so as I was in college back in Germany, we were going on this geeky ski trip, and one of my friends, who was also my roommate at the time, he brought a Python book to that ski trip. And I hadn't really heard about Python before that. And it was one of these like pretty crappy, learn Python in, 48 hours or something like that. That never really works out that way. And I was just kind of thumbing through this book, and I thought, man, like this is actually really, really cool, like a really, really beautiful language. And it just somehow resonated with me. And I decided to start using it for little projects after that. But it like literally started on that ski trip. And the same guy also introduced me to my future wife, so I have a lot of things to thank him for.
So that happenstance has ended up leading you to working in the language and being a fairly significant contributor to the ecosystem in terms of resources and content curation. And so I'm wondering if you can start by discussing a bit about your primary job these days and how you got to the particular setup that you are now, where you're providing these trainings and producing these various products and resources and working on creating and curating content for people in the Python ecosystem.
Sure. Okay, so that's gonna, that's it's a pretty tough question, especially because I don't reflect a lot about this stuff. I just kind of, it's a very like greedy algorithm. I just look at the next thing I could do, and I sort of don't have like a big master plan. But so I guess, how did I end up doing what I do today? So a typical day for me is reviewing, editing content for realpython.com, and also, writing content for the newsletter or our various other channels, and then also curating other people's articles so I can share them on our various outlets, like the Real Python Twitter account or the PyCoders weekly newsletter most recently, and then the Real Python newsletter as well. And so I guess the typical day, involves a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and also a lot of coordination between the various people in our team. And so my life wasn't always like that. I was on track or on the path for like a typical software engineering career or programming career. And, I loved programming my whole life. I got sort of into programming at a fairly young age. It must have been, 7 or 8. And, grew up in Germany. I am German. And I basically learned English by reading programming books. And so it's always had this like huge influence on my life. And I always knew that I eventually wanted to work as a software developer because just I loved it so much. And it was just a perfect fit for me. Because I could really obsess over this stuff for hours, and then when I got access to the internet and I was reading, the game engine source code for the Quake game engine, the Doom game engine, I was just spending hours reading that stuff. And I always, had like a really, really strong passion for writing code specifically. And then later on also for things like system design, architecture, and all of that stuff, how to make code beautiful and make it maintainable and all of these things. And so it's just on track, kind of building a career in that field. And somewhere in the middle there, I moved to Canada So I moved to Vancouver in British Columbia and worked for a company there, and had a blast. And after that, I became a freelancer / consultant. So I was doing contracting work for that same company, other companies, and I felt like now that I had more control over my time and sort of how I organized my day, it was time to give back in some way. And I'd always been reading a lot. Like I said, I sort of grew up on programming books, and a dream of mine, like personal, like life goal, had been to write a programming book. And so I felt like it was the time to finally do that. And I also realized that this could be a really great way to market my consulting skills, because, if you have a book under your name, that's actually a really fantastic business card. And I've been like blogging and writing programming tutorials online since about 2012. And it had done a lot of good things for me in my career as well, as a portfolio piece and just as a conversation starter. And so all of these things sort of came together, and I started working on that book. I started blogging more actively about Python, and it all sort of snowballed to the point I had started a YouTube channel and a newsletter, and I was producing a lot of content, and it was resonating with people. And it had gotten to the point where I felt like, man, like actually my dream here is not to be a consultant right now writing code for other people, but I'd much rather go out and help the world become better programmers, and to educate programmers, and to share some of that passion that I had and still have for programming, and for Python specifically. And so, it kind of hit critical mass, and I felt like, well, I could probably make this work financially somehow as well. Let's just see if I can work something out over the next 6 months. And it's just working nonstop. My book came out, and it did pretty well, and it enabled me to do a lot of the things that I now do in that space. So it's really been like a kind of a crazy roller coaster in terms of what I do now and what I've done just like 2 years ago. Most recently, I've been writing a lot of code again for the Real Python platform and the PyCoders weekly backend. And sort of it's like a beautiful mixture right now. It's very fluid for me, and I can kind of jump onto things that I really enjoy doing. And obviously you got to pay for food, and you got to somehow keep this whole thing alive. So it's not always like fun and joy, but in general, I really love what I do right now. And it's very diverse in terms of the actual tasks. Now, I actually totally forgot what your question was, but I hope that gives everybody who's listening a vague idea of what I do today.
No, that's great. That's exactly what I was looking for. As you mentioned, you're very engaged in the Real Python platform, and I know that you ended up taking that over, I believe it was sometime in the past year or two. So I'm wondering if you can discuss a bit about how that came to be and what your current roles and responsibilities are in relation to Real Python.
Sure. Yeah. So Real Python, it's a site at realpython.com. It's specifically about Python, lots of programming tutorials. And for me personally, I'd always known the site. When I got into Python, eventually I found it. And for me, it was sort of the shining beacon of light. And as I started building up my own blog and, was writing under my own name, I felt like, man, like this site is really amazing. Like, how did these guys get there? And because the content was really high quality, it was well researched. You could tell somebody was writing about this stuff who was actually doing that in their day-to-day work, using these things in their day-to-day work. So it was based on professional experience. And I always really appreciated that. And also I thought the name was fantastic. And it's just like a real brand in Python programming, if you will. And so over time, I'd become, I'd made contact with Mike Herman and the other guys who ran the site, and we sort of became friends. And as what I was doing under my personal brand, if you will, as that was sort of growing and starting to hit that critical mass that allowed me to focus on it full time, I felt like the best way forward now is not to keep doing this under my personal brand, because I was already stretched pretty thin. I was creating, I was doing daily videos for my YouTube channel for a while. I was writing a very like story and sort of writing heavy newsletter update every week. And I was also putting out one like full length tutorial, and I was working on another book project. And then I was, coding on the side, obviously, like keeping the whole platform alive. And so I was already stretched pretty thin. I felt like there's only so much you can do if you're one person. And it's going to be hard to bring other people into that universe. I mean, other authors and other people who want to reach the Python community if it's all under my name. And so as I was in contact with Real Python guys, I kind of got the sense that they were ready to move on and do something else because they'd all, grown a lot in their careers or had started different companies or just had lost interest maybe a little bit in Python specifically. And so one day, I woke up in the morning and sent out literally a 2-line email or so. I was like, hey, have you be interested in selling this thing and me taking over the site? I love the site, super passionate about it. And what do you think? And, we started talking about this, negotiating, and lo and behold, at the start of this year, I took over the site and started running it. So that's kind of the backstory of how we got there with Real Python.
And in terms of the effort that's necessary to keep the site running and the types of content that you're focused on and the way that you bring people on to produce guest posts, I'm just curious if you can talk a bit about the overall processes and time commitments that are necessary for that.
So we don't do guest posts. The site did that in the past, but I've sort of completely revamped that, rewrote the backend. So we have a new CMS that's based on Django and Python, obviously. And we stopped doing guest posts. So I think with a guest post, a lot of times the incentives are all wrong. So, and the reason I'm saying that is I felt like, I've been really, really focused on writing good content, good tutorials in the Python space specifically for, a couple of years now. And it takes a long time to get to that point where what you put out there resonates with people. Not like trying to toot my own horn here, but I felt like I got pretty good over time. And then when I did the book, sort of, like a big boost for my confidence there as well. And so what I realized is that if you want to have a good site there that people can really benefit, that our readers can really benefit from, you need to have standards in place, consistent style guide, consistent editing process, and consistent feedback and review process. And I built all of that up based on the best practices that I learned in the years prior. And the problem is if you do guest posts, it's very hard to get to that quality standard because you're working for someone with an author for a very short period of time. And usually the motivation is also there, I have a book coming out, so can I just promote that by giving you a chapter and we publish it? And, nothing wrong with that. A lot of sites do that, but we completely stepped away from that model. And I fundamentally believe that you want to build a strong team and work with these contributors, these authors over a longer time frame, and then really train everybody up and really pull everybody up together so that we have a consistent style across the site, consistent quality checks. And we've gotten pretty crazy with our process there in a good way. I like to say, maybe it's just the German genes. Germans love their process, but I feel like if you apply it correctly, then it's actually very, very beneficial. And so I think that's our secret sauce. Where we bring on people who love writing and they love educating the Python community, and they are also professional programmers. And when you take the intersection of all of these things and then have a good brand name out there and have enough repeating visitors and sort of a broad base of readers, then you can really I think do something great for both the authors and the Python community, and grow the site at the same time. So that's kind of the philosophy there that I follow.
And because you're obviously still bored and twiddling your thumbs day to day, in the past few weeks, you ended up taking over the PyCoders newsletter as well because you didn't have enough to do. So I'm wondering if you can give a bit of the backstory there and some of the additional time commitments and responsibilities that came along with taking over that PyCoders brand and the weekly newsletter.
Yeah, sure. So like you were saying, I got a little bored and I thought, well, what other, what else could I do with my day? No, I guess it's funny, like with PyCoders, I guess was kind of similar. So one aspect of my day-to-day, or my job, if you will, that I really enjoyed is curating other people's content and, kind of finding really good tutorials or really good podcast episodes, videos, and then using the channel we had built with Real Python and my own site before that to surface that and share that with the community, because I personally benefited so much from that. And just so many other great educators who are out there, like Raymond Hedinger, and his Twitter account is fantastic. I loved all of his talk, and I really wanted to pay back the favor, if you will, for those people spending their time to help us grow our skills, and then to use the audience we had built to circulate all of that information within the community. And so I just always really enjoyed that aspect. And I also really loved the PyCoders weekly newsletter, because I remember, the first time I got one of my articles in there, and this newsletter has been around since 2012. It felt awesome, to wake up and, I was in Germany, different time zone. So you wake up in the morning, it's like, oh my God, I had a couple of thousand views on my blog there. What happened? And you check your Google Analytics and you figure out like, wow, okay, this thing was featured in some newsletter. And it just felt really, really good. And so I wanted other people to have that experience as well. And so with PyCoder specifically, I guess how I ended up becoming the editor-in-chief, or curator-in-chief for PyCoders, is kind of similar to the way it happened with Real Python. Became friends with Madi and Mike, who built it up from scratch and had curated all of the content. They're both very, very busy. They've got their own startups. They've got families. They've got a lot of other things to focus on. And so it was just a good time, I guess, to have a change there. And I'm so fired up about the publishing model in the programming space, and specifically publishing online written content, that we just started chatting about this, and we worked out a deal, and I started running the newsletter about I think it's probably like 4 or 5 issues ago. So yeah, like a little bit more than a month ago. And I just had an absolute blast. I migrated the whole infrastructure over, and I think we've done some really, really cool things there with also the archaeological and archival aspects of the site. So now we have a full issue archive going back more than 340 issues. It will be searchable soon. People can comment on this stuff, and for some reason I just get a real kick out of that, like reading other people's stuff, and then writing little summaries and sharing that with the Python community, and also making, doing that in a way where it's not throwaway. I don't want to say throwaway content, but when you put something out on Twitter, it's very ephemeral. Ephemeral is the right word. It goes out, almost nobody sees it, and it just kind of gets buried under 10 million other tweets. And I love doing things, and I love investing in things that have more staying power. So, with Real Python, we're really focused on evergreen content and things that we can maintain over a long time. And we have a very intensive process of, multiple review stages and editing and proofreading passes, so that the final result is really, really high quality. And so with PyCoders, I wanted this thing to be the same way, where I feel like email to a degree is a very ephemeral medium too, but less so than Twitter and other social media. And if you can bring it together and you have sort of a strong web presence as well, and has a strong Twitter account as well, you can really do something nice for the Python community, and people can go in, they can go back like, how long is that? Like 6 years into the past, and look through these other issues and can kind of see, what was featured frequently. What are some of the things that people were recommending in the past? What are they recommending now? And I just get, I can't really explain why, but I just get a huge kick out of that, bringing, like taking that out of MailChimp's hands and putting that out on the web on our own platform and our own hosting. And yeah, so that's sort of the long and short. I guess it was more the long of how I started running the PyCoders weekly newsletter.
And so now that you're managing PyCoders and Real Python, as well as offering your own training services, and I know you have a few other products that you are promoting and selling, I'm wondering, what are some of the synergies that exist between these various projects and roles, and some of the areas of conflict that are starting to present themselves?
Okay, interesting question. I think some synergies are pretty clear. I mean, if you look at PyCoders and Real Python together, they're both channels, if you will. Like Real Python, we just recently broke through we're getting 1 million unique visitors a month, which to me is just an absolutely like insane number. It's just crazy to think about that. There's just so many people who want to read about Python online. And I mean, I love it, obviously, and our authors love it, and apparently our readers love it too. And but it's a big channel, right? Like we can surface things, we can put things in front of the Python community, and so is PyCoders Weekly. It's just a different medium, I guess. One is primarily a website, the other one is primarily an email newsletter. And some of the synergies there, I guess, are pretty clear. Like, we can share our own links in the newsletter, and vice versa. We can use the Real Python website to build up the newsletter audience. And so, some synergies there are very, very closely connected in terms of growing both of these audiences. I guess those are probably the main ones I would think about. Yeah, and I think, today, it's like, not to sound like I was like beamed in from the 90s or something, but it's all about multimedia, and there's so much going on in this space right now. There's podcasts, there's email newsletters, there's websites, there's YouTube. A lot of like great video content. Maybe soon we'll have some like VR stuff. And I think the way to be successful as a publisher today is to have your fingers in all of the pies there, at least a little bit. And because I really love written content and very rich and in-depth written tutorials, the newsletter avenue was a pretty sweet path, just because I enjoyed personally, and I know how to build a great team around it. And so, I think those are probably the main synergies.
And then in terms of any sorts of conflicts that might exist, whether it's conflicts in terms of time management, of being able to run all of these different properties, or conflicts in terms of perceived conflict of interest, or just conflicts in terms of other work that you'd like to be doing. I'm curious if there is anything that has started to crop up on that front.
Okay. Yeah. So conflicts in terms of, how do you make time for all of that stuff? I think really there, I can just praise my team and everyone that I work with there on the Real Python tutorial team. It's just been, such a fantastic change also for my personal life to be sharing this with other people, and to be able to grow and learn with each other and from each other. So, I'm not a huge expert on what's going on in the data science space, for example. I think I'm pretty solid when it comes to the web dev stuff and just pure like core Python things and some of the architectural principles. But I'm not a huge data science guy, for example. And it's just been absolutely amazing to grow the team with folks who care deeply about that and have a very deep and intuitive understanding of what's good in that space and what people should learn, and kind of how to sequence the whole, like, okay, how do I go from A to B? And so that's really helped me get out of that burnout zone, I think, because that's a pretty clear danger, I think, if you're starting sort of a one person company, one person show in that space. If you're on the hook for everything, it's very easy to get burned out, I think. So that, in terms of time constraints, that's definitely like the highest up on my list there. So yeah, I think it's, at a certain point, you want to get to the point where you can distill your knowledge and then build a process around that, and then empower other people to actually improve on that process. For example, our editor, Joanna, she's doing an amazing job running our publishing pipeline, and we're working together very closely to iterate on this stuff over time and make it better and better and better. And so we've built up a lot of in-house expertise that I don't think anybody else in that space has right now. And it's been very rewarding, and it definitely helps to kind of share that work. I mean, conflicts of interest, I think like one of the things that we did recently, we started accepting sponsorships on realpython.com, and the PyCoders weekly newsletter always had sponsorships, but I think there's room to grow that as well. And I think we found a way to make that ethical. I mean, like, every time we do that, that's disclosed, has a little sponsor tag. I know that a lot of people, let's say some very vocal people, have issues with that in our space, just because we think that information should be totally free. And it kind of sucks for some people if anything that you do is monetized in some way, or it has sponsors. And the problem with that is, I would love to sacrifice myself for a good cause, but really nobody is going to win that way. I mean, the only way that, let's say, Real Python is sustainable, we can put out like 2 really, really solid tutorials every single week is because we can pay the authors, we can pay our editors, we can pay our graphic designers, and we can pay for hosting, which, it's not, we're not a YouTube or we're not a Facebook, but still, you got to serve all that traffic. You want to make sure it's up all the time. And so I think there's always a fine balance between, how do you do advertising, for example? I think we found a pretty good way in that I built an ethical ads platform for the site. It doesn't track you. It just counts a click and it redirects you to the target page, and it shows you an image-based ad banner. Zero tracking involved with that. And to me, that is a point that I'm very comfortable with that situation. Just as I'm comfortable with, for example, you having sponsors on this podcast, other podcasts having sponsors as well, or people maybe doing a sponsored tweet if it's disclosed. I don't see a conflict of interest there. I still get emails, multiple times a week where people are just absolutely, losing it over the fact that they've seen an ad on the site. And to me, that's crazy. Like, I mean, would you rather like all of this stuff disappears and we'll shut it down rather than seeing maybe an ad banner that we actually custom design and you don't have to even click on it to access the content? And I've tried other models in the past, for example, a contributor model, sort of a Patreon model. And I think it's pretty safe to say that it just flat out doesn't work. Like, at least for us, people are willing to read the content, share the content, benefit from it, but very few people are willing to give back to the creators. And just looking at the numbers, it just no way that I felt like we could get to the point where this was enough to cover costs for the site. So that's sort of how I feel about advertising and monetizing things in general. And I feel like that's sort of the biggest conflict of interest, or so some people might say. Like, in my mind, there is no conflict of interest because it is the only way. I mean, I would love to live in a future where we don't have to worry about any of that stuff. But for now, I'd rather make sure everybody on my team gets paid, and my wife doesn't yell at me because I spend all day in front of the computer and we can't afford to buy food. So that's sort of the perspective that I look at things.
Yeah, no, I can definitely agree with that. And when I first started this podcast, I set out to just say, oh, this is just going to be a community effort. I'm not going to seek sponsorship. But after seeing how much time and effort is required, I eventually ended up agreeing to speak with some different sponsors. And thankfully, I've been able to keep that sustainable over this time. And as you mentioned, the Patreon model, well, it's nice, it's not very reliable because somebody may decide to contribute 1 month and then retract that contribution the next month. So having a sponsorship agreement that you can count on more long term and have some sort of a sales funnel to keep conversations going with potential sponsors, just making sure that the products that you're trying to promote are in line with the audience and something that's useful, as opposed to just accepting advertisement from any random person who wants to give you money, I think is just the best way to strike that balance and keep things sustainable while being able to have sort of the freedom and sort of editorial latitude to be able to produce value for your listeners and your audience.
Exactly. Yeah. I think really that's the key point, right? You want to have a filter there in terms of who you accept as a sponsor. I've told people, no, we're not gonna. I don't believe in that product. I mean, I maybe put it a little bit nicer, but it's I'm not gonna promote something that I can't. That makes me feel yucky, that I can't stand behind. I mean, obviously, if it can be a challenge if you're trying to be critical of some things, or you're trying to write an honest review or something like that, and then that might be conflicting with a potential sponsor you might want to have in the future, or you have on the site right now. I think for the most part, I feel like with our sponsors that we have on the site, they're all awesome, and I've never actually been contacted in any way where people said, yeah, okay, so we'll sponsor this site, but then we also expect like you like really play up our stuff or the service that we're selling. I don't think that's the expectation that sponsors really have. So that hasn't been like a huge source of conflicts of interest for me. But I think it's definitely something that as content creators we need to stay on top of. We need to stay vigilant about, because I mean it's a slippery slope, right? Like, I mean, how convenient would it be to maybe accept like a sponsored post? Maybe I don't mark it as such, or something like that. And so I'm just drawing like a very hard line where it's like, okay, sponsorships are on the banners. We don't do sponsored links, we don't do sponsored posts, and our allegiance is to our readers, because that's what everything starts with, and then that's also where it ends at. And so at least to me, that's a pretty clear line. But I mean, I can definitely see the challenge in there. So yeah, actually really interesting question, and thanks for bringing it up.
And so between the work that you're doing with PyCoders and Real Python and your training materials and your engagement with the community and participation in conferences, there's a lot of incentive for you to keep up to date with all of the different goings on in the Python language and community and ecosystem. So I'm curious what strategies and resources you use to be able to stay on top of content discovery and ensure that you're trying to maintain visibility of all of the different aspects of the language and the community and the different geographies and cultures that all come together to make this community that we're part of.
Man, I'm really curious about your answer there too. So what I would say, I think in terms of finding stuff that is interesting to the global Python community right now, it's very hard to do if you're doing it all by yourself. And that's what I did for the longest time. And it's been actually like a huge game changer to now have the Real Python tutorial team, because it's globally diverse. We have people in all kinds of time zones, from the US, Canada, the Philippines, Zimbabwe, Norway, the UK, Germany, India, and, many other places in Europe. And we're also pretty diverse in terms of like age levels and across genders. And it really helps to have it personally really helps me to have quick access to all of these perspectives, where I can just throw something in our Slack, or, somebody will share something that they found that is cool. And it really opened up my perception to all of these other things that were going on, because I was kind of living in my, like Python web dev bubble. And not everybody is working every day with Flask and Django. People are doing like a pretty diverse set of things with Python. And maybe a lot of them don't even see themselves as programmers. And so I think what really helps me personally with that is having access to our team. I started this forum. It's called Pythonista Cafe. And it's a private forum, and that's a great arena to kind of bounce off ideas, and where people feel like they can just speak freely about the things that they're struggling with, that they care about. And so that's been a huge source of ideas for me as well. And just the ability to bounce off ideas with people there too, as they're learning Python, or as they're teaching other people Python. And so while I live and breathe this stuff every single day, and I love it, eventually you hit a limit, I think, as far as what you can do as a single person or as one person. So you gotta reach out and build a network. And I'm constantly chatting with other content creators in the space, sort of what they're seeing, what's interesting to them. And in terms of an actual like algorithm on how to do that, I don't have one. I feel like as far as the sourcing goes, it's just like, I have as many channels that surface stuff as possible. But in terms of the curation piece, I feel like I just have a really good gut feeling now of what I think makes content worth sharing with our audience, because I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what our audience wants to see. And then also I have a good understanding of the other side, writing books, articles myself, of what is something that somebody put a good amount of thought into. And it's good advice that I feel comfortable sharing, because everything is out there already, right? Like there's so much information on the internet. And I remember, just a couple of years ago, I felt like it wasn't that way. It was sometimes really hard to find a good programming tutorial, and you'd like really have to, really make you feel like there was this like element of joy of like, oh yeah, I found this thing. I don't have to buy a book on this, or I can just read this. I never thought about it that way. I feel like now there's so much stuff coming out every single day that really the curation is the key piece now. And curation in a really broad sense, like, okay, so maybe you want to listen to a podcast, because that's the person running the podcast is they're gonna surface interesting stuff and it goes through their filter, so you can kind of offload that responsibility to the show host. And it's the same thing with a newsletter like PyCoders, or it's the same thing with a website, where I think you want to increasingly trust somebody else's filter, or otherwise you're just going to get overwhelmed as a reader, as a learner, as a professional who wants to stay on top of things. And so, to me, these things have huge value. And a lot of times it comes down to just, sort of the gut feeling of that particular person.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with what you said there, as far as there is a vast amount of information and it's coming from all directions, and having a network of people to be able to gain perspective from and surface other areas of use that you might not be aware of is immensely valuable. That's why after I shut off the recording for all of my podcasts, one of the last things I say to the guest is asking them to suggest any other topics or projects, etc., that I should be taking a look at for other episodes, because that's just another means of content discovery, because everybody's got their own lived experience and what they see as being important or interesting. So it's just a great way of being able to come up with additional ideas that I would never have come across myself. And then, yeah, the sort of gut feel of curation of which topics are going to resonate most and which one's going to be most valuable, which ones can I sort of extract useful and entertaining information from is generally sort of the process I go through. So I maintain a list of all the different episode ideas, and sometimes when I'm going through, it's interesting to try and say, oh, well, I've already touched on this topic. I feel like I've covered it fairly well, so it might not make sense to cover this other project that is in the same space and will most likely, retread the same topics. So it's interesting to try and keep that Venn diagram in mind, especially as you add more and more content over time.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, that reminds me of what you just said. Reminded me of this sort of effect. You're trying to learn some skill, and let's say you want to get some coaching for that, or some trainer, somebody who could teach you how to play the guitar. In my own struggles there, and I actually stopped playing, like a decade ago. So I never really like won at that, but I guess I got pretty good at programming instead. What I was going to say is that there's, at any given point in time, there's going to be, thousands of people who can teach you how to play the guitar, but you want to find somebody that you resonate with and that you trust in that regard, and so you want to try out a couple of teachers and just see, who do I want to learn this from? And I think it's similar with any skill that you may want to learn, in the sense that you want to try out a couple of channels and curators in that space, and then kind of mix and match that stuff. I'm not sure if you necessarily want to do that with news sources, but that's like a whole nother conversation. But I think if you're trying to learn a skill, the curation part is just so insanely important, and being able from people that you feel like you can trust is really a key piece. Yeah.
And in terms of the resonating effect and the impact and utility of the information that you're surfacing as a content creator and a content curator, I know that in my experience, one of the difficult aspects is being able to encourage and elicit feedback from your audience. And so I'm curious what your strategies are for being able to foster engagement and facilitate conversations around the work that you're doing.
I think for me, it's email. So it's a really big medium for me, and I guess that's why PyCoders Weekly was sort of a natural fit. And so I always get replies back to the newsletters that I sent out, and I encourage it, and I try hard to answer most of it, but obviously that's, at a certain point, that's not really possible. But I found that that's just a great channel to get to hear everybody's, well, not everybody's perspective, but to have a feedback channel there, because it's very much one-on-one. It's not a public comment, and people are pretty unfiltered when they reply back to emails, good or bad. And so that's been actually very rewarding for me most of the time, and sometimes also stressful, of course, but that's been just a good back channel for me to understand what's resonating with people. Then, like I said, there's the Pythonista Cafe private forum. That's also just a really great way to see what how people feel about the content we put out recently, and it's much more unfiltered than a public conversation, and more balanced, I would say. And obviously, I guess people joined the forum because they've been reading Real Python or my website or my book. So I guess that there's bias in that as well, but nevertheless, it's been a really helpful channel, or back channel also. Similarly, Twitter. I think Twitter is actually really great in the programming space. There's a huge community of Python developers on Twitter. You can in some cases directly interact, or at least read what people are saying who are actually contributors to the Python ecosystem, whether that's on CPython itself or the big frameworks, and they're all there. So that's another big channel that I personally find really, really helpful. We've also got a public comment system on each Real Python article, and that's super interesting to see too. What sometimes people surface little things that we missed, and then we go back and patch up the article. Sometimes people ask for more information. Sometimes they just share their homework problems on there, which is interesting too. But that's also a good back channel. I've also got a YouTube channel. I've sort of put it on pause. Like I don't put out a lot of content there, but it's really interesting to see like how people engage with video so much differently, and it's a much more emotional realm there. So that can be both good and bad, but that's also a back channel. Let's see here. Did I miss anything? I recently built out this thing. It's sort of a feedback form, and we have a new book project coming up for Real Python. And so what we're going to do there is we're going to do an early access version of that book soon, where at the end of each chapter, there's actually a feedback link in there that ties that feedback directly back to the Git commit of that specific chapter, that specific section in the book. And we've been sort of beta testing that on a interactive quiz feature on realpython.com as well. So you can take these like interactive coding quizzes, and they're either multiple choice, or sometimes you have to write a little bit of code to make it through one of those quizzes, and you get a score at the end. So it's a really great way for people to check their learning progress and also to surface the areas that they should focus on. And so there as well, you can comment on each question individually. It kind of feeds it back into our GitHub, and we can directly look at what people had feedback on. But that's more a mechanical thing, I guess, or like a little bit of tool support. But in the widest sense, I would say, a lot of email and Twitter.
And so in addition to your work with creating this content and curating it and filtering it, you've also built a number of different product offerings. So I'm wondering if you can discuss some of the process that you have for identifying relevant opportunities and then creating and marketing these different projects and products.
Sure. Yeah. So we offer a couple of paid training books and courses that are specific to Python, both on realpython.com and my personal website. And then also, some of it is on Amazon as well. You can buy it in a bookstore, like the Python Tricks book. And we actually have a book project coming up for that we'll publish via Real Python that I'm super pumped about. It's called Python Basics, a Practical Introduction to Python 3. And it's based on the existing Real Python course, but we're updating it to Python 3.7. We're making a ton of changes in there. It has completely revamped exercises, and I'm super, super excited to hopefully release that within the next couple of months, let's say. I think we'll do an early access a little bit before then, but it's going to be a book for people who want to get into Python 3 specifically, and they want to know everything they need to be dangerous with Python, but maybe not have a sort of a dry reference. But we're going to make it very practical. It's very engaging. And the early feedback that we've received is really, really encouraging. So I'm really pumped about that. And I'm in general, with this question, I am the most excited about books. I think, again, maybe because of my personal history, how I got into programming, I would say that books had the biggest influence on me as a programmer. So I'm really pumped about them as a medium. I guess some people were thinking, or maybe still are thinking, that they're on their way out. You can just watch videos or go to YouTube or something like that. But I think there's something really great about learning things from a book, because you can go at your own pace. You can read fast or slow. You can reread things. You can scribble on the margins. You can take notes. And so I'm just really stoked about that as a medium. And I think we also have a broad reach with an audience that loves reading about programming or loves reading programming tutorials. And so I guess your question was also about how do you figure out what's an opportunity there, or like how do you figure out when to create a product? How do you go about it? I think one way you can do it is to just follow your passion. I think that's what I did with my Python Tricks book, where it's been sort of like a personal dream or goal of mine to write a programming book. And I didn't really know if this was going to resonate with anyone. I think at least initially that gets you started, that gets you working. But then really quickly you want to get it out to the world in an early version to kind of confirm or to get some real world feedback. And I think the best way to do that is by starting to sell an early access version. Because if you give something away for free, I think it has two effects that are detrimental to both the creator and also the consumer of that content. I think for the creator, if you give something away for free, it's very easy for people to say like, oh yeah, this is great, I loved it, and like maybe they never even took a look at it, and they don't really assign any value to that thing because they got it for free. Now, if you charge a little bit of money, there's an exchange of value, and at least supposedly, right? And if that's lopsided, you're going to get that feedback. People are going to ask for their money back, or they're going to talk to you and tell you that they were happy with it or they were not happy with it. This is how you could potentially improve it. And it also has that effect that I think as a consumer of tutorials or things that you paid for, it's actually a pretty big motivator. I think there's like psychological research that confirms that it's a really big motivator for people to actually follow through and learning stuff. And I've had that same effect in my life, where I got some coaching or I purchased a course or something. And just by the fact that I paid for that content, I felt like, okay, I better make this work. I better get at least as much value out of this information. And so I think for me now personally, obviously I think with Real Python, we're in a really good spot in terms of seeing like what articles do people like to read. That's probably an opportunity to do a deeper dive and do some sort of book or course project on that. So some of it is totally data driven. Again, a lot of it is gut feeling driven, but we always want to quickly confirm that hunch and get more data on it by testing things out. And so I think that's actually a fantastic way to do it in today's world, because you can go out there and you can test things out and you can quickly get back that data, and you do not have to go through a big gatekeeper or write a full book for a year and then maybe have it fall totally flat. And that's actually pretty awesome. And I don't think we've had that ability as content creators for too long. Now there's all kinds of stats. You can see what resonates with people, and I certainly take that into account. It'd be totally stupid not to.
And what are your plans for the future growth and development of your media empire? Do you have any new takeovers in the works that people should be keeping an eye out for? Any new additions to your growing suite of brands and domains that you're responsible for?
the media empire. Okay, that's an interesting question. I think with when I look at what I do, like for me, it's a very I want to say organic process. Like I don't have like the big master plan, right? Like this is where this is all going to go. I hope Python is going to be around for a really long time, obviously. But I think where I'm at, like personally right now, I'm just coming out of a big growth spurt phase, if you will, with PyCoders Weekly. It's just been heads down, writing a lot of tooling to do the curation and the ranking of content and the sharing, and also hosting for that site and things like the archive that I mentioned, all of that stuff. And so I've just been really heads down focused on that, coding every day for that particular project. And I find that after I go through a phase like that, I always need to refocus, consolidate and also polish what's already there. So as far as that goes, I think for me, the focus now is really on Real Python and the PyCoders Weekly newsletter and our upcoming book project, and doing everything I can to give the Python community, or our readers, a really great way to improve their skills and to have fun doing that. And so I don't think I don't see any big acquisitions on the line. But you never know what happens. Let me know if you want to get rid of your podcast. No, just kidding. But I think we can do much more for the Python community. And it doesn't necessarily involve starting a new site. But I think, we've got a lot of the pieces in place there. And I'm stoked about the book project that's coming out. And so I think that could be a potential avenue for us moving forward to really double down on the publishing side there. And it's also something that I'm personally really passionate about and really pumped about. So if anything, I think it'll be more stuff that comes from within rather than by adding more pieces to the puzzle.
And as someone who is so deeply involved in the conversations and topics that are being discussed in and around Python, I'm wondering what you see as being the biggest opportunities and threats for the language and its community in the coming years.
Well, I would say, like in my mind, there's some, like a few pretty clear technical weak points in the Python ecosystem. Like I want to preface all of that by saying that, I love Python. It's it's how I make a living, and so like I'm on your side, right? Like if you're listening to this, but I think there's like two pretty clear weak points, I think, in the Python ecosystem right now. One is GUI applications, and I would lump in with that also, the bundling and deployment of applications. I mean, how awesome would it be if I could just, hit the return key here on my computer, and it would bundle up an application, like a self-contained application or installer or something that I could distribute and then install on Linux, Windows, and Mac, and it would just run there. I think that would be amazing, and it would really help a lot of people with their use cases. And today we don't have that. It seems like there's a lot of development in that space right now, so I'm excited about that. But I think that's definitely something where we can't compete with a lot of the other things that are going on in that space. And when you're thinking about mobile apps too, I think that's also not an area where we're doing really well right now. Performance is an issue for some use cases. I mean, at the end of the day, there's multiple programming languages, and you can always fork out performance intensive stuff to things like a C library, or maybe like a Rust library in the future or something like that. So I'm not too concerned about that, but obviously it would be nice to sort of have Python as like a no-brainer language that people love to work with, and it shines in any use case that you could throw at it. I don't think these are necessarily like huge threats to Python, but that's how you start losing. Like you want to be on top of things, and you want to make sure that you're on top of the currents there in software development. Where's the world moving to, and how can we make Python better so that it is the best tool for that particular use case that's coming up. Then I guess the other thing, what's a threat to a language's community? So one thing I want to say here is that at the end of the day, all that a programming language is or has is its community. Like if we didn't have a Python community, and if we didn't have people who are at an individual level, if we didn't have people like, if you're listening to the show right now, like you're probably really passionate about Python, and if we didn't have people like you, then nobody would give a damn about Python. And I think that's something we always have to keep in mind, where the language is really the community. And I think Python has an amazing community. I mean, I've been working with other technologies. I've been to a ton of conferences, and I just always felt really at home at a Python conference, and I just always had a good time there. And so I think that is like the biggest advantage that Python has, because it will lead to more growth, and it will enable people to do useful things with Python. And so I think that's just like a key point for me. We got to think about this, like code is communication, and whatever language you use at the end of the day, in like 90% of the cases, I feel like it's not. Well, let's just say it's not all up to the technical merits and the syntax of a language. Sure, that plays a big role, but after a certain point, because there's thousands, like maybe like hundreds of thousands of languages out there that you could just install right now on your computer and maybe see if you could get them to work. But really, what makes all of this work in the industry and for developers is the community that we have. And so I can't really think of any specific threats to the Python community, but I think we also have to stay aware of the fact that it really all comes down to the community.
And are there any other aspects of the work that you're doing in terms of creating and curating and discussing the content and topics around Python that we didn't cover yet, which you think we should discuss before we close out the show?
Oh man, I feel like we covered a lot of stuff. It's really, really interesting though to talk about this and solidify some of my own thinking. No, not really. I really appreciate it if you haven't heard of Real Python. yet, or the PyCoders weekly newsletter, to check them both out. Let me know what you think about them. I'd be really interested in that as well. You can find us at realpython.com and at pycoders.com. And I think then you're all set. You're going to know what's going on in Python.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes for anybody who wants to get in touch with you or follow the work that you're up to. And so with that, I'll move us into the picks. And my pick this week, I'm going to shamelessly promote my other podcast, the Data Engineering Podcast, which covers exactly what it sounds like. So that's topics around the storage, collection, governance, security, etc. of data and all of the different sort of big and small data technologies that are out there. So if that's in any way interesting to you, I'd appreciate it if you check it out and give me any feedback. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Dan. Do you have any picks this week?
So I've become a huge fan of the Black, the uncompromising code formatter for Python code. I believe the project was started by Lukas Lange, and it's just an amazing tool. Like yesterday, I spent a bunch of time working on a project that I hadn't sort of upgraded, or we hadn't updated the build process to run Black on the whole thing. And it's actually like a pretty frustrating experience. And I only started using this maybe like 8 weeks ago or so. And it's just had a profound effect on how I write Python code. So basically what Black does, it's a command line tool. You can integrate it with editors like Sublime Text or Visual Studio Code, and it will automatically reformat your code to follow PEP 8. And in cases where PEP 8 is ambiguous, it will make a decision for you. And to ensure that every time you run this, it's going to come up with like one sort of preferred formatting solution for your code. And it's just so great to be able to copy and paste a bunch of stuff in, run this command, and it's formatted nicely. And it's also great for collaboration because you don't have to ever like argue or discuss any sort of formatting change. And you can integrate it with your CI pipeline on your build server, so it will flag things that are not formatted correctly, and so you can make sure that your code base is 100% formatted consistently according to the rules of this tool. And I just love what it does, and it's really made my coding life a lot easier, I feel like, and I don't really know how I wrote Python before I had that tool. No, just kidding, but it's a really damn useful tool.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to discuss the work that you've been doing in the Python community and in helping to shepherd the Real Python and PyCoders weekly properties. So it's been an interesting conversation, and I appreciate the time and effort you put into all of that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers, Tobias. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, and keep up the great work with your podcast. I think you're doing a lot of great work for the Python community, and having stuff like that around where people can kind of integrate Python with their day, and they go to the gym, maybe listen to a podcast, or they drive to work on their commute and listen to a show. I think that's just amazing, and it's kind of crazy what world we live in today where we can do that. So thanks for all the hard work, and thanks for inviting me.